The rain in Seattle didn't bother Elias Thorne. It suited the anonymity he had carefully curated over the last decade. To the world, Elias was the owner of a dusty, cluttered antique repair shop in the quieter part of the city, a man who smelled of linseed oil and old varnish, whose clothes were perpetually stained with sawdust, and who drove a rusted 1998 Toyota pickup. But in the secure servers of Zurich and the skyscrapers of New York, he was known as the architect, the reclusive founder of Omni-Global, a conglomerate that touched everything from shipping to silicon. He had walked away from that life after a car accident took his wife and daughter, leaving him with a fortune he couldn't spend and a heart that felt like shattered glass. He sought only simplicity, a quiet existence where he was valued for his kindness, not his stock portfolio. Then he met Clara. Clara Whitmore was a vision of delicate beauty, raised in the opulent bubble of high society, but possessing, it seemed, a distaste for its superficiality. They met in a park where Elias ate his lunch alone. She was feeding pigeons, escaping the pressure of a debutante ball. They talked for hours. She told him she hated the greed of her world. Elias, starved for genuine connection, believed he had found a soulmate who loved the man, not the myth. They married in a small civil ceremony. Clara's family, the Whitmores, did not attend. When they finally met Elias, the disgust was palpable. Clara's father, Richard, a man drowning in gambling debts and bad investments, looked at Elias's calloused hands as if they were contagious. Her mother, Victoria, refused to sit on the same threadbare sofa as Elias. "Clara," Richard had sneered during their first dinner, "you have thrown away your legacy on a handyman, a nobody." Clara had blushed then, apologizing. But as the years bled into one another, the apologies stopped, and the resentment set in. The Whitmores' poison was slow acting. They chipped away at Clara's resolve, reminding her of the galas she was missing, the vacations she couldn't take, the shame of being seen in Elias's rusted truck. Elias offered to sell a few things, quietly through proxies, to improve their life, but Clara had too much pride to accept charity from a poor husband. Then came Daniel Sterling. Daniel was an executive at Omni-Global. He was slick, arrogant, and drove a car that cost more than Elias earned in a decade. He was exactly the kind of shark Elias had fired 100 times in his previous life. But under Elias's self-imposed exile, the corporate culture had grown toxic, and men like Daniel had risen to the top. Clara met Daniel at a charity gala she attended alone. She didn't know that Elias was the anonymous donor who had funded the event. She only saw Daniel's Rolex and heard his smooth lies about his importance in the company Elias had built. The affair was brazen. Clara stopped coming home at reasonable hours. She began to criticize Elias openly, comparing him unfavorably to Daniel. "Daniel is going places, Elias. He has ambition. He doesn't just fix old clocks." Elias watched it all with the quiet detachment of a man who had already lost it all once. He knew who Daniel was. He had seen the personnel files. He knew Daniel was embezzling funds and sleeping his way to a promotion. But he said nothing. He waited. The end came on a Tuesday. Clara threw her purse onto the scratched table of their small kitchen. "I want a divorce, Elias," she said, her voice trembling not with sadness, but with excitement. "Daniel and I are in love. He's offered to take me to Paris. I can't stay in this poverty a moment longer." Elias looked up from the watch mechanism he was repairing. "Are you sure, Clara? Once this is done, there is no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything," she spat. "You have nothing to offer me. No status, no money, no future. Sign the papers." Elias pulled a manila envelope from beneath the counter. It was already prepared. He signed them with a steady hand. "Goodbye, Elias," she said, grabbing her coat. "Try not to be pathetic about it." 3 days later, Clara and Daniel stood in the grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate. They were celebrating their engagement and Daniel's recent appointment as the new CEO of Omni-Global. The Whitmores were beaming. Richard Whitmore had already secured a hefty loan from the bank, assured by Daniel that his new position would guarantee their financial salvation. The double doors at the end of the hall swung open with a heavy thud. The band stopped playing. The chatter died instantly. Elias walked in. He was wearing a tailored Italian suit that cost more than the entire Whitmore estate. His posture was rigid, his eyes cold steel. He didn't look like the dusty shopkeeper. He looked like the king returning to claim his throne. Clara dropped her champagne flute. "Elias?" Daniel sneered, stepping forward. "Security! How did this vagrant get in here?" Elias didn't stop until he reached the center of the room. He pulled a remote from his pocket and pointed it at the massive screen on the wall. The image of Daniel and Clara faded, replaced by the logo of Omni-Global. "Daniel," Elias said, his voice echoing through the room, "you were promoted to CEO this morning, correct?" "I don't know who you think you are," Daniel began. "I am the founder. I am the majority shareholder. I am the man who signs the checks that pay for your suits, your mistress, and the gambling debts of her father." The silence was absolute. Clara's face went paper white. "You? But you're poor. You're nothing." "I was hiding, Clara, from the pain, but I found that I couldn't hide from betrayal." He turned his gaze to the room. "Richard Whitmore, the loan you took out this morning. I own the bank. It's called in, effective immediately. Victoria, the country club membership, paid through a corporate account I just closed." He looked at Daniel, whose legs were beginning to shake. "And as for you, Daniel, the audit I ordered 10 minutes ago revealed the $3 million you've embezzled. The police are waiting outside." "No!" Daniel gasped, backing away. "You can't do this." "I can do anything," Elias said. "I built that company on integrity. You built your career on lies. The difference is I have the power to tear yours down." Pandemonium erupted as the police entered the room. Daniel was handcuffed, screaming protests. Richard Whitmore collapsed onto a chair, clutching his chest, as the reality of his destitution hit him. Clara stood alone in the center of the chaos, weeping, reaching out to Elias. "Elias, please. I didn't know. I made a mistake. We can fix this. I still love you." Elias looked at her with a pity that was far more cutting than anger. "You loved a version of me that didn't exist, Clara, and you despised the man I actually was. There is nothing to fix." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the deed to the repair shop. "I signed the divorce papers. Everything in my name remains in my name. The house you are standing in is foreclosed. The cars are repossessed. You have exactly what you earned on your own. Nothing." He turned and walked out of the room, the heavy doors closing behind him, shutting out the weeping of the Whitmores. 6 months later, Elias Thorne was no longer in Seattle. He had moved to a quiet coastal town in Maine. He still restored antiques, but he no longer wore a disguise. He used his vast fortune to fund a network of shelters for women fleeing abuse and scholarships for artists who couldn't afford to chase their dreams. He poured money into ethical technology, ensuring that the companies he owned treated workers like family, not assets. He walked alone on the beach most evenings, the cold Atlantic wind biting at his face. He missed the idea of love he had held with Clara, but he no longer felt the hollowness of the betrayed. He had learned finally that the greatest fortune was not the billions in the bank, but the ability to look in the mirror and respect the man staring back. And in that quiet reflection, Elias Thorne at last found peace.